Okay. We can get started. As always, this call is being recorded and will be posted online. Let's kick things off with a few administrative things. Next call is scheduled for October 8th. Same time, 2 weeks from now. If this is an issue, please ping me off the call and we can see if we can work something out. And then I think the one after that will already be on the week of TPAC. And on that front of TPAC, we don't have an agenda quite yet, but I'm hoping to pull something together next week, maybe along with Nick. We haven't really talked about that, but yeah, we
work to do.
We'll have something in place way before the calls themselves.
If people want to present some idea, they should let you know, or
yes.
Yep.
Basically we'll have some skeleton agenda, and then we'll send it to the list, and folks could comment and pile on ideas on that. Okay, cool. And with that, we can probably get started. We don't have a ton of open issues to discuss today, but at least one of them seems to be a hefty one. So we can take our time and discuss it in depth. Nick, do you want to take on this one?
And honestly, so just before we dive into that too, I did want to mention that we've had 2 weeks worth of hackathons now over the last 2 Tuesdays. Thanks to everybody that's helped participate in those. I think we've done a lot of good stuff. I know Yovi had shared a list of all the things we accomplished on the first one, and we all made a lot of good progress last Tuesday as well. So I think for anybody else that's interested at all, we love the help, but I think as a group we're doing a good job kind of pushing a lot of things forward. So. Yep. Okay, so the thing that I wanted to bring up actually came from some of the from the first hackathon. It's turned out to be a little bit bigger than even I expected. So this is navigation timing issue 128. It's also related to issue 100. And it's currently in a pull request under navigation timing under worker start and redirects. So a lot of this started by a request that we add worker start, so service worker startup time, to the navigation timing diagram. Let me share my window just so we can all look at the same thing. I am attempting to share a GitHub issue right now. Let me know if you see it.
Okay. But maybe you can bump up the...
Yes.
Like zoom in a bit.
Zoom, zoom, zoom. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this started with a request to add worker start to our fantastic navigation timing diagram. This is around where worker start would be. So service worker startup time happens before the first fetch of the last resource. So maybe it needs to go like right here or something, but it's around this timestamp, and we can talk about that in a moment. There's a couple things that I found, and I wanted to kind of make sure everybody agrees with when we're talking about worker start. So first of all, in this diagram, in our processing model, service worker startup time happens right before the fetch. I had just placed it on the bottom here, but so some code review feedback suggests we may want to make it a little more obvious that the worker start time should happen before fetch start definitively within the diagram. So we could either kind of move worker start up, and its little arrow could be before fetch start, Or we could have a whole phase right here, like a new phase, which is called worker or something, just to make it more obvious that there's a period of time between service worker startup and when the fetch happens. And that's your kind of service worker startup time. I don't know if there's any strong opinions on that. It seems to me like having a phase would make sense and make the whole diagram a little bit clearer. Any concerns? Okay. So I'll probably...
Would there be... Would that implicate that worker starts before the fetch? That's what you're trying to convey.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And the time between the fetch start and worker start is how long the service worker actually took to start up. So how long the JavaScript initialization and parsing time and everything took to start up.
Okay. So the fetch start would not start until the worker start completes.
Right.
Or the worker phase.
The worker phase, the worker startup period completes. Yep. And that's what we do have locked into our processing model right now. Like that's how we describe it. But obviously, it'd be helpful to have a visual representation of that. Okay, so that one's relatively low controversy, I think. One thing that we do today, or that we were talking about, is the worker start itself is actually, well, there's a bug in the processing model that I've attempted to fix where we were, in the case of redirects, so let's say your navigation redirects to a cross-origin domain and then comes to a final resting place. The worker start time was actually reflecting the cross-origin origins service worker, if it had any, and not the final origin. And if you had to redirect, the final origin was always zeroed out. Or sorry, if you had same origin redirects, it was always zeroed out. So there's just a bug in the processing model that this pull request attempts to fix, and you can kind of take a look at that if you'd like. But one thing I wanted to make sure that we all agreed on here is that worker start itself is not same origin protected. The worker is for the final domain, it's for the final origin, whereas things like unload event, redirect start, those are all same origin protected because they're from the previous domains, previous origins. It seems logical that worker start should not be protected by the same origin check because it's part of the final origin that you're actually landing on. And I believe that's the case, but I just want to make sure everybody would agree with that.
I guess one case which may be tricky here is if we have a, so let's say we end up going from A to B to C to B.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And B has a service worker in that case.
And B has a service worker. Would worker start represent the time of the second redirect? And in doing so, expose details on C potentially?
Well, so that steps into the other potential change that we were going to propose, which is that in the case of multiple redirects, the service worker startup time would always be the first request of the last same origin redirect chain, right? So if there's multiple same origin redirects at the end, it's the first request of that because that's when the service worker should be starting up. If there's only one thing at the end, it's just the last resource. I think you're explaining an even more edge case, which is where we hop over to the last origin, but then hop away, then hop back. And in that case, does the service worker get die down? Does it start back up? It would seem to me like, according to that proposal, we would it would probably be a 0 millisecond service worker startup time because that's the startup time of the first request in the last same origin redirect chain.
I agree that it should be 0. We should make sure that that's what the processing model
Okay.
says.
Okay.
Timo politely raised his hand. So
yeah, I just wanted to ask, so is that the same for redirects as well. So the redirect start time, end time kind of exposes a similar concept, right? Where it could be the beginning of the chain, that same timestamp. So we do the same thing there as well?
Well, the redirects are currently protected by the same origin check. And the same origin check says if the previous origin and the current origin are different, they must be 0. And if there are any redirects to another origin, they must be 0. So it's even more aggressive than worker start. Like it says, if there's any redirects that happen anywhere off origin, those must be 0 no matter what.
So that means that you don't get, so like using the same example where like you go A, B, C, D, and then say DD, like again at the end.
Right.
Would redirect start reflect nothing? It would always be 0 because
it would be 0.
Right. So you don't get to see even like the ones right before that were on the same origin. Okay.
Correct.
I see.
Correct.
But for worker start, we would do that potentially.
Potentially. I guess that's the proposal here, is that at the end there you're staying on the same origin no matter what. The problem, I think the problem, I don't know if it's a problem, but maybe if we set redirect start, for example, to be the first redirect of the last same origin, you could infer immediately based on the start time how many redirects were on from the cross origins. But I guess maybe you could do that today, even just with fetch start.
Can you repeat that? I missed that last bit.
I was saying that maybe you can infer what the redirect start and end are today with fetch start, just the difference between fetch start and start time. But you don't know if there's any redirects. Like you don't definitively have proof because all of those timestamps are zeroed out, and redirect count is zeroed out as well, critically. So I think if we were to like try to set redirect start to be, my same origins timings, it potentially gets us into territory. Well, then what do you have the redirect count be? Is that 0, or is that just reflective of the final origins? And is that confusing to people that know that there's other redirects, off origin redirects on that chain?
Yeah.
Sorry to hop back to something.
That unless there's a strong use case to expose that.
To change it, yeah.
I just want to hop back briefly to something Nick was saying earlier about where there could be a separate box in the diagram. I think actually that would be quite helpful. One of the things I've noticed in aggregating the data for Wikimedia is that we felt the need to introduce a virtual box that we call gaps, which I don't know if there's a separate issue for. Maybe there should be, but given that there seems to be a very specific time where the worker startup starts and where it ends, visualizing it as a separate step would, I think, reduce chances of the data being misinterpreted by developers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. Second one kind of change for sure. What was that? Sorry, I missed.
Marcel pinged on chat. So.
Yeah, I have a question here regarding the this box in between redirect and app cache. So worker start, if I understood correctly, can mean two things. Either if the service worker is up and running, it will be the time before the fetch, or if it not, it will be the time that the thread actually started, right?
Right.
They could mean different things. In this case here, regardless if all the redirects are passing the cross-origin algorithm or not, does it matter the state of the service worker? Because what if in this redirect chain, none of those has any fetch, or the fetch handler is not registered? Should we report this the time that they all start the thread of those, or because in theory the fetch start could be calculated by getting the timestamp from the event, the fetch event, right? Or am I missing something here?
Well, this would be for navigation timing where we don't have access to the actual fetch. You're talking about The actual fetch API?
Yeah. The if the fetch event, if the fetch start in this case here should be the navigation timing, right? If the service worker is registering a fetch event, so this will be the time in this diagram here representing the fetch start, right?
Yep.
At least inside the service worker context. So my question here is, because worker start for me is always being, while monitoring, I noticed like a huge gap in either the worker is not up and running or is already running, and they mean different things sometimes. So
yeah,
does it
so
matter?
I guess one thing that I take that you're saying is that there's a worker start time, and then there's also a worker about to fetch time, and then there's a fetch start. And if the difference between the fetch start and the worker start is very large, it probably indicates that the worker had to start up first. If it's very small, it probably indicates that it's already started up, but we're not like definitively exposing either of those scenarios, right? And are you arguing for a little more clarity in either of those scenarios, or something else?
Yeah, because if we introduce like another box in between, and the box has no start and end, it's just like pointing, like in this case here, it's just to explicitly say is in between these two boxes. So what's the point? Because there's only one metric here, and it would be nice to have like when the worker start and the fetch start, it will be a gap or something.
So I guess what I was envisioning would be, the redirect phase would stop, worker start would be there, the phase would be worker, and at the end of worker would be fetch start. So that phase would start at worker start and end at fetch start.
Similar to, I guess, response end and things like that. They don't have their own start end name, but they would be a start and end.
They're lined up to the next start phase, I guess, yeah.
Okay, so and related to the redirect chains, so if all this in a chain of redirects, if all the service workers involved are not fetching anything, which one does it really matter, or should we count only the last one as a worker start?
So let's say let's actually just use let's get rid of cross origins here. Let's just say you navigate onto the same domain and then you end on the same domain. So there's just one, or I guess let's say you navigate, you start off domain, you start on a search result page, you hit the first page on a domain, then that redirects to the second page. They both have a service worker. In that case, the worker start would be the beginning of the first same origin request, and fetch start would be the beginning of the request for the final content. And and then in that case, you would actually also have redirect start and end set because they're all same origin. And your worker startup time would include redirects as well. So I guess that is potentially a downside of measuring it this way, is service worker startup time in that case could not be separated from redirects happening. So if your redirect takes a second, that would be included in the service worker startup time if you're looking between the fetch start and the worker start.
Okay.
So, which I don't know if is good.
This proposed box in between these two boxes here, how many metrics will be pointing to it? Just worker start in the middle? Or?
Just worker start at the beginning.
At the beginning?
I guess is what I was proposing.
So fetch start would be still pointing to app cache?
Yes.
Or, okay,
right. Yep.
Yeah, I think this is potentially a downside of the proposal, where if we preserve redirects in the sort of more aggressive way that it is today, but have workers not be that way, then there's a confusing overlap. I mean, on the one hand, I guess we, I don't know if we're saying that we regret the way we did redirects, I don't know, but like if we want to start exposing things on the same origin, but do it on one but not the other, that is potentially confusing. I would think I would prefer that it only measures the last working time in that case, or that we might agree on a direction where we do it for both.
For consistency, you're saying it should just be the worker startup time of the final document, not the beginning of the requests in the last chain. Yeah. So in that case, you would never be able to if you have a document series that has a service worker, you would never be able to measure the service worker startup time. But in the other way, we wouldn't really be able to either, because the redirect would be included in that service worker startup time.
Yeah, but I mean, in that scenario, service worker will delay. Like, you still need to take that service worker startup time into account, because it will potentially delay, like, unless we're talking about navigation preloads, which are a bit unique in that sense, but otherwise the service worker is in the critical path and will delay you, so you probably want to.
It's in the critical path, but I guess what I'm saying is we can't actually measure what it is if there are any redirects. If
there are any redirects or any cross-origin redirects,
even if it's all same origin redirects, because worker start would actually be at the beginning of this redirect phase in that case, and then you would have all your redirects, and you don't have a worker end, so you don't know the actual startup time of the worker. You know the startup time plus the redirect phase together, and you can't separate the two out.
I mean, isn't fetch start like worker end in that case though?
For the second request. For the first request, that's like worker start would in practice be right here. A redirect would have happened, and then the worker would activate again for fetch start for the final document. But like the actual startup time of the worker would be completely missing unless we have an actual worker end timestamp.
But so at some point, I think during the hackathon, we talked about maybe splitting the redirect phase into cross-origin redirects,
right,
or potentially cross-origin redirects, and the full chain of same origin redirects that led to the thing.
final
I guess
thing.
that for service workers, if we had a service worker before then, like during the cross-origin phase, like a cross-origin, same origin, cross-origin kind of hop, it would still be in the critical path, but we won't be able to measure it. But maybe that's fine as long as we can measure. Like, I don't know how much those flows are popular compared to same origin redirects.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like a search result page that like pings itself back to the search engine and then redirects to the final page once or twice could be, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess now that we've talked about it, I'm kind of sad that worker start would not be useful in any case if there are any redirects. Makes me sad.
I don't know the background on the absence of a worker start end. Could you maybe share a few words on that?
I don't remember either, honestly. I think this was work that was done maybe 4 or 5 years ago to add worker start itself. We could probably take a look at the history there. There might be some discussions around it.
Because if there aren't any privacy implications or security implications, then it could potentially represent, as you say, the first fetch in the last same origin chain.
Yep.
You'd have to start and end of that, and then there'd be potentially some gap, and then you have your fetch start.
Yep. Okay, I will take that as a to-do to do a little bit of research on what we maybe have talked about there in the past.
Sure. Yeah, I could answer this. So the question in the chat is if I could talk a little bit more about the gaps that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think I'll send an email with a link to our source code. But in a nutshell, we have all of these start and end ranges. And then we also have the navigation start and the load event end. And when we add up all of our steps, it doesn't add up to the total. Often there's maybe a 10 millisecond gap, which is actually visualized in the diagram. Like not all the boxes actually touch, so this isn't entirely unexpected. It's just that we'd like our graph to be stacked with different areas being attributed to different phases, and so at least some of them attributed to this gap. So that way you have the different steps like redirects, TLS, TCP, and these different things, and then you have your sort of line chart load event end at the top, and it's sort of detached from the rest of the stacked graph.
We deal with this as well with the Akamai Impulse data, where we have a couple names for these phases, like that we commonly think that they are. Like even though here it's called app cache, but there's like that. There's also like a head of line blocking kind of phase sometimes that can happen based on the timestamps that you got and stuff like that. Awesome. Thank you for that discussion. That helps a lot. Okay. Let me make sure that's all I wanted to chat about here.
Yeah, maybe we can all take an action item to try and like find folks who are actively using worker start and getting them to chime in on the relevant issues to see if, if exposing all those details, assuming it's safe, whether it's meaningful or it will just, add complexity without much benefit.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is if we change the definition a lot, wouldn't it break existing users, or are there any concerns around that?
Definitely.
Yep.
So yeah, we need to see, like, I think we need to find current users and make sure they're part of this conversation, both in terms of use cases as well as in terms of not breaking them.
Yep, that's fair.
And also, I guess let's be sure to, if we make some decision, engage all the other user agents to make sure they're all okay with it, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben, did you have any other concerns or thoughts about like a worker end time or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think that thanks, Timo, for answering the question about the gaps, and Nick kind of for adding in a little bit there. I thought that was productive. I mean, I feel like we still maybe are kind of inching towards the metric being worker start time instead of workers, or like we want like a worker startup time instead of worker start. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. I don't really have ideas, but it feels like that's maybe a little bit more what we're going for. What would be actually actionable?
Yeah, and for full disclosure, this is a thing that we are tracking in Impulse now as well, which we're trying to track the startup time of workers because we've seen it impact our customers. So being able to do math in a consistent manner in a way that we can understand is important there. Yep.
By the way, maybe somewhat related, I'm not sure because I haven't read it entirely. There's a resource timing issue about workers as well. So that's issue 119. So something, I guess, to keep in mind.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Honestly, like I haven't squared away all these changes with how it would affect the actual resource timing spec and stuff there, so I can make sure we keep them in sync, obviously. Yep. Okay. Work to be done. I will summarize everything that we've discussed here, tag the people that have been talking, and we can continue talking in that issue or elsewhere. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. So next up, we have buffered flag and feature detection. So performance timeline issue 176. Nicholas, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So the issue is basically right now we have added some parameters to the observe method of performance observer. So now you can use the buffered flag, for example, and the type instead of entry types, which must be used with the buffer flag. Anyway, it's all quite confusing, but the point is it's not easy to feature detect whether, in particular, the buffered flag is supported in a user agent. So right now, what you could do is do a try catch and see if the performance observer works with type and buffered flag, or if it throws an exception. And if it throws an exception, then you can just spin up a performance observer with entry types, because then you won't get the buffers anyway. So just spin it up with entry types and pass on the entry that you're interested in. But it's basically kind of unergonomic, and also requires exception handling, which, from what I've heard, some developers are not entirely comfortable doing that in production code, which is a little surprising. But then we basically don't have a solution for this. I'm also not sure how much we're expected to provide all this support for exposing how supported the parameters within a single method are, right? Because there's also like, we could just go all the way like, oh, this is supported, but then it becomes really spammy maybe as well, the API. Anyway, so I was curious what other people here think. Basically, if there are people that have experience trying to use the buffered flag, whether it has been a painful experience or whether they think the status is okay. Or
And the current behavior is to throw a user agent would technically throw a like unsupported argument exception or whatever that exception is if it did not support buffered. Is that correct?
Yeah. So because the parameters are inside a dictionary, I believe a user agent that does not support type will throw if it does not find entry types, which will be the case if you just pass type and buffered. So it will just say, oh, you didn't pass entry types. And I expect it will throw, although I didn't verify this. Probably should. Like say in Firefox or Safari, I think currently it will throw if you try to observe with type and buffered. So the idea would be you try catch it, and then you try using entry types if it fails. To gather the greatest amount of data possible.
Yeah, so if we were to add some feature detection, it would be some like some sort of a supported pattern. So yet another method that will, like on performance observer, or that will tell you whether it's supported, because there is no natural way to distinguish that for dictionary items.
Yeah, because right now I believe in WebIDL, if you pass parameters that don't mean anything to a dictionary, I think they're ignored. So yeah. That's.
So
someone raised
if they are ignored, why is it throwing? Because it doesn't have a entry types? Okay.
I think so, yeah. Someone raised their hand. Pearl.
Yep. Something for the rest of the group. I've touched on that briefly during the hackathon days. Basically, for kind of a reference, something that can show us the try-catch way that probably Nicola was mentioned is also one of the proposed ways to do feature detection for the passive event listener attribute. Like it's kind of pretty old. And also there, we have a specific issue that has been raised in the WebIDL repository, which is basically the feature detection pattern. So there's already discussion there. It's pretty long. I haven't done my research on that discussion, but there have been like some arguments going on for a couple of years. So
okay.
more than a couple, to be honest. Yeah, kind of 4 years.
That seems super relevant. Yeah.
It's exactly what we have been discussing.
Okay, so seems like someone needs to read through the thing and summarize it.
What issue?
The issue is like in chat, issue 107 on WebIDL.
Yeah, sorry, I posted both links in the chat for people.
I suppose I can share anecdotally in using, I've only used the API once so far, but I did make the mistake that I did have a try catch on the buffered version and then didn't have another try catch for the regular version, because that would also need a try catch for different browser support and for how the types go back as well. So definitely +1 on the ergonomics. I wouldn't usually mind the try catch, but the fact that you have to nest it to go multiple variations, that does kind of make it unpleasant to use.
Yes, but I think that this will, like, if we were to add some fancy feature detection that would only work in the latest browsers, probably the ones that also support the buffered version, and then you will still need to, like, if you're saying we already need try catch for the older ones because there are like the oldest ones, then this is probably not something we can solve. But still, it potentially, like, we can reduce one level of nesting for the try catch. That could be potentially nicer.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think by the time we'd be ready with this, we'd probably no longer need the third level because we'd presumably decide to have slightly less telemetry on that, given it's not production source code for us in that sense.
Yeah. Cool. So who wants to take an AI to dig into the like WebIDL 107 and see where that landed? The issue is still open, so it's likely that the answer is nowhere. But still, it would be interesting to not rehash that discussion because it's been going on for the last 4 years, apparently.
I could take a look and maybe comment saying that we are also interested in some feature detection from the WebIDL side, which would make it way easier instead of just adding our own custom one.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Okay. Cool. So shall we move on to the next and final issue? Yeah.
Sounds good.
Cool. So yeah, next issue is performance timeline 168 reset the observers. I'm not sure this is something we want to thoroughly discuss. It's basically pointing out the fact that we don't have a reasonable way to measure SPAs other than user timing. So they basically want us to reset all the start of navigation observers. At least that's my reading, but maybe Nicholas and Michael, do you have, like, do you think we should just fold this into the broader we need to measure SPAs, or is there something more than that here?
I do think it's just deserving to be folded into the broader definition. So it's more than just resetting of observers and re-reporting, because it's not apples to apples what gets reported during page load. So I think Nicholas commented that for at least layout instability, you have full control over doing something like that. Like you can reset your counters and accumulate per route and stuff like that. So the existing API already works. There was a request to make it a little bit easier out of the box to like call some sort of request function or reset function. But for things like input delay, I think there's room to make that work. But certainly for paint, it's, first paint and or largest contentful paint after page load, starting from blank canvas, is much different than after an arbitrary point in the page. And I don't think it's neither as easy to report on these. For like security and performance reasons, it might not be possible to report arbitrarily, but also the metrics that come back won't be equivalent. Largest contentful paint, there's a large discussion about it. Like, should it be related just to the frame that was created, or the portion of the DOM that was actually adjusted and that sort of stuff? Or should it be the whole page? And if it is, then it's really the next paint as opposed to the real contentful paint. So you can't just reset metrics, I think. And then for some of these things, I think the value, like event timing provides like next input delay. So the only difference being that after an interaction that constitutes a SPA route, you might want to have a lower minimum threshold, which event timing doesn't give.
Yeah.
Sorry, my network
connection. Yeah.
I turned off camera because I had a temporary blip. We'll see if it. I think that was it.
Yeah, maybe you can repeat your last sentence because at least I missed it. But
hopefully network's all right. My last sentence was just on input delay and event timing. One difference is that there's a minimum threshold for event timing for subsequent events after the first. Whereas if you really wanted to reset after a SPA transition, you'd want to have a like 0 minimum threshold. So that's the one thing for at least input delay that you'd want to be able to reset. Oh,
yeah, because first input delay is always reported versus event timing further down. That's, yeah. And then there's the security question of can we enable that for less than 16 milliseconds. Cool. So my takeaway is that, yeah, we should probably fold this into a broader, like the broader issue of SPA reporting. Do we have an open issue on that or a separate repo on that? Or is that still just in like proposal phase? And in which case we could, keep that issue around until we'll have one.
I don't know that we have a broader one. We have a lot of related ones, but I don't know if there's like an overall issue tracking up.
Yeah, so we can probably have some joint label that will enable us to keep track of all the SPA related issues in the various repos, and then once we have such a repo, we can move all of them or, sum them up or something along those lines. Cool. So I can...
Makes sense.
Yeah, I can take an action item to actually do that and add that label. Cool. And with that, I think we are, weirdly enough, wrapped up all the agenda ahead of time. So,
can I steal 1 minute for
the...
So I was doing a tag review for has dropped entry, which is, in case people don't remember, it is basically a parameter for the callback of the performance observer, where it tells you whether the observer is observing an entry type for which the buffer has become full and one entry has been basically dropped from the buffer, which means basically you've lost some data on that observer. So the question they had was, well, they commented that they don't like the name, has dropped entries, the proposed name. So they proposed a different one, which was, what was it? Wait. Oh yeah, it was has buffer overflow. So I'm wondering if people have opinions on which one is better or clearer, because I don't really, so yeah.
I guess the only thing that bugs me about this one is that it's not correct English. Like, maybe it's has buffer overflown. I don't know.
That's true.
But maybe I'm being petty.
Or has a buffer overflow.
Right.
To make it grammatically correct. Yeah, but I mean, that was the feedback we got. Oh, and I guess one question that just came up, if you have the callback and let's say there's a user agent that supports only the previous callback, and then you pass the callback that has that additional parameter, will that cause issues or is the parameter just ignored? I don't know enough JavaScript to know the answer.
It's ignored unless they... So typically you can look at the args and I think like at some point they will be undefined. So unless someone explicitly checks, like the case where it will break is if someone explicitly checks that arguments that didn't exist are undefined and do something in that case. Otherwise, I wouldn't expect breakage.
Okay, cool.
That scenario.
Just making sure we don't introduce another feature detection problem here. But yeah, okay, so other than grammar, are there any other objections to has buffer overflow / overflown?
Or anyone with suggestions for a better name?
Would buffer overflow as a term imply some security issue to people not familiar what that means?
There's
it became a term, right?
Yeah. Timo suggested is full, which I like as well, or was full.
Yeah, but so full is fine, except that we want it to actually be full and have a missed entry.
Right.
So it's less accurate, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Is full plus one?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, we'll go with that name. Perfect.
No strong preference from me. I just whatever, whatever someone decides, I'm sure is gonna be fine. Okay, put all our names into a hat and pull it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the concern about association with buffer overflow is pretty valid. So maybe
Yeah.
I'll comment that in the tag review. And basically, their complaint was that it's not as accurate because it implies that it has only dropped a single entry, which I don't really agree with. Because it's just, does there exist an entry that has been dropped? Not has it dropped exactly one entry. But anyway, that's what they said. So
yeah, maybe we could we'll add the issue, like, yeah, we can have that discussion in the, like, with the tag reviewers themselves. And yeah, but I'm the association with buffer overflow is not great, and it will cause confusion. So yeah, we can continue to negotiate something. But yeah, if like, do you have a link, like a handy link to the tag review that you can?
I just posted it. Yep.
Okay,
in the chat.
cool. So yeah,
in case people want to also follow along the fun conversation of naming.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds good. So yeah, so let's continue that. And yeah, otherwise I think we are out of things to talk about. So in that case, yeah, I'll see, like, all of you that are joining the hackathon, I'll see you next Tuesday. And all of you who are not, please join the hackathon. But barring that,